Andrew Tate. He's all over the place. And if you know anything about him, he's controversial. He was recently on Piers Morgan, and he talks about marriage and how women are the property of men. So I thought what I'd do is give some reflections on that and see what you think below. So if you like this, don't like it, write your comments below as I do this. So here we go.
5 or 6 seconds long. There's no content.
Do you think women are the property of men?
No. The point I was making...
Why have you said they are?
Because I made a religious point. I said that when a man marries a woman, the woman's father walks her down the aisle, and hands her away to the man. Traditionally, this is what it says in the Bible. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I live in the most religious country in the world.
So you do think that the woman becomes the man?
I don't know what Bible he's reading. It never says anywhere in the Bible that you walk a woman down the aisle ever. There's no aisle. There is zero instruction in Old or New Testament that I know of, not in the Protestant canon, not in the Tanakh in the Old Testament. There's nothing that tells us the ceremony that's supposed to take place. So I'm glad he's religious. I don't know what that means, but the Bible says nothing about that process.
I think she takes his last name.
I mean, let's watch the clip that you said about this so that we can get it in context.
So I think my sister is her husband's property, yes. When a bride is walking down the aisle to marry the groom, the father walks next to her and gives her away. True or false?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. But I've been married twice, as it turns out, and on both occasions, I didn't believe that the woman was being handed to me as chattel, as property.
Perhaps the way the reason I'm asked that question repeatedly, and I'm asked in a loaded way.
So would you rephrase what you said there?
Now, that's an interesting point about phrasing. The way I would say things before I was famous, I have to take personal responsibility and accept that if I make a video that 500 people see and 1% of them misunderstand it, that's not a problem. If I make a video that 5 million people see and 1% of them understand.
So specifically on that point, I think my sister is her husband's property.
She took his last name. She married him. She wanted to join his family. She has said it herself.
Right. So she's
still a sovereign individual. She's absolutely not a sovereign individual.
Property means that the husband owns your sister.
Listen, my friend, if we want to argue about this, you need to go back to the Bible, to the Quran. You need to argue with religious.
No, I'm not talking about any.
Oh my goodness. I can't wait to hear what Bible verses he used to support this. Property means something is owned. I don't know what religion he's talking about. Certainly not biblical. That's something I know a little bit about. The Bible never says anything about a wife becoming the property of a man. But anyway, so let's keep listening. Let's see.
I think in the Bible or Quran.
But that's what it says.
No, I'm asking you what you think.
I think that if a woman marries a man and she decides to take his last name, that they have different roles and responsibilities within that marriage. And I believe that.
That's not the question.
I believe the father. I am. The father hands her.
Don't behave like a politician.
The father hands her to the man.
Right, but don't be a politician, because I think you're a straight talker, right? You keep telling me you're a straight talker. I think my sister is her husband's property. Do you regret saying it like that?
I understand that with my newfound fame, perhaps it could be phrased differently. However, I still believe that a woman is given to the man in marriage. That's what I believe.
Yeah, but not...
So obviously he thinks property means that which is handed to the man in marriage. That's all. So you should just explain that. And then, of course, refute it. That's not what the word property means. Property means something that belongs to something, is owned. It has no rights of its own. It's owned. It has a master, it has a superior. And there might be biblical concepts, and I would argue this, implied throughout the Old Testament particularly, where the wife does not have the same political roles. That's true. But it is not the case that she's has no rights, has no role whatsoever, and it certainly has nothing to do with handing over the husband. So they should just describe what you mean by property. We'll say more about in a second about the last name. I think he says more about it. I'll talk about that.
Property.
No, the property is the word that other people use when they ask me the question.
But as an equal partner in a loving union, that's what marriage actually means. It doesn't mean that when you get married, the woman is given to you as a bit of chattel.
Agreed.
So why say it?
Why say
that? But that's the way that people ask me the question. People say to me, they ask the question.
Hang on. You can't blame people for asking you questions. Surely, if you want to be accountable for what you've said, you've got to own your responses. Don't blame the question.
I own the response.
It'd be like me asking you a question now and you say something and then say, well, actually, I blame you for asking.
I understand, Piers. Piers, I understand. I believe the woman is given to the man. I believe she's given away by the father. I believe she belongs to the man.
So fundamentally, you do believe that a woman becomes a man's property at marriage.
I believe she belongs to the man in marriage, correct.
Right.
Belongs. If you say that loosely in the sense of belongs to me in faithfulness, okay, sure. And maybe that's what he's trying to get at, maybe.
Oh, you see, that to me is misogyny.
And you're entitled to your opinion.
Right. But do you not understand why people think it is misogyny?
I understand why some people can be very offended by what I say. What they do is they take a point like that and they ignore all the other points I make the other way around.
Yeah, but that's why I've repeatedly asked you about that line to see if you've changed your position. But the reality...
Yeah, misogyny is from two Greek words, miso and gineo. It means woman hater. So just even if he did think that the woman becomes actual property of the man, doesn't mean he hates women. That doesn't follow at all.
The reality is you haven't.
It's not about changing positions. I'm a full-grown adult and I stick by the things I say and I'm responsible for them.
Which, by the way, is fine.
Absolutely.
But what you did say at the start of this little exchange, you said, you know, I wouldn't maybe say things the same way now that I did before I was famous. And yet, actually, you've doubled down and said exactly the same thing.
On certain points.
So that is what you believe. And that's my point.
Yes.
I'm trying to work out, look, I don't know you. We've just met, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to work out who Andrew Tate is and what you actually believe. I don't want to twist anything at all.
Then let me make it very, very clear to the camera. I believe a woman is given to the man in marriage. I believe that. I also believe a man has a duty to protect and provide for her. I believe a man should lay down his life if something happens or his wife's life is threatened. I believe that women and children first are on the lifeboats.
But men,
I believe that men...
But a man doesn't own a woman.
It's not, no. It's,
unless they literally buy them as a slave.
Well, obviously we're not talking about that. We're talking about religious, biblical marriage. We're talking about something else.
Yeah, but I'm a Christian. I don't believe that I own my wife.
Do you believe your wife was given away to you when she took your last name?
I believe that there is a process where a father traditionally walks his daughter down the aisle and hands his daughter to this man, and they stand there and become a union of two loving people in a partnership. No, there's no ownership involved.
I didn't say ownership.
He's not selling her. The father of the bride isn't selling his daughter.
No, absolutely.
That's what
Okay, well, there was a time that is exactly what happened, and as far as we can tell, certainly around the Norman invasion, this is the 10th, 11th centuries or so, around that time, that became the custom called coverture, and that's when they taught the English that coverture is when the woman takes on the man's last name, and it's because at the time period, of course, she did not have rights. Based on the research I've done, she didn't have rights at all. Now, maybe I'm mistaken. Historians can tell me better. Based on what I've read, she didn't have any rights, and she couldn't own land. She couldn't do all kinds of things. And the only way for her to do such things was if she took on the role, the name of the husband, who then, of course, had that authority. You might say to a degree it was delegated, but she couldn't do it independently, that's for sure. And that seems to have been the case in the ancient world in general. So it is true that for a long time in the Western world, and very much, well, the process, the custom of taking on the man's name is still very much the dominant way to do it, certainly in the Western Europe, European, and of course the Western world, you might say. But in the ancient world, it is true, both in Judaism and Greeks and Roman and so forth, that in general, the wife did have fewer rights. And she, particularly in Judaism, you couldn't own land. It was conceivable if you were a widow, but in general, the man had to take care of things, and that was their duty and their right and their role, just like the woman had her right and role, which was the Lord of the realm at home with the children and so forth. And it depends on the culture and depends on the race. But what is not biblical is that, in that sense, she has no independent rights. And that's where we're going back and forth on whether or not he thinks the person is property. If you just drop the word property, everything okay. But at the same time, he thinks it's property. Okay, own it. It just seems like he doesn't, because then he asks him to explain it, and he's like, yeah, that's not what I believe. Not a slave, of course not. But that's what property implies in any case.
She becomes a member of your family.
Is it?
I think we're arguing over semantics.
We're not, though, because fundamentally, I don't believe a man owns
semantics.
a woman.
See, people say, by the way, when people say we're arguing for semantics, there's sometimes, I guess, that could be silly. For example, logomachy is from two Greek words. It means your war over words, logomachy. Sometimes it's senseless, particularly it's senseless if the words are synonymous or have almost small variants of meaning. But it's not just arguing over semantics or logomachy if it actually makes a distinction to the argument you're making. And that's the point here, is that Pierce is saying, are you sure you don't want to backtrack of saying the person's a property? Oh, that's just semantics. Well, words matter. So the answer is this isn't a senseless discussion. It actually matters to your point.
You do.
Well, I don't think a man owns any sovereign individual. I don't think we live in the world of slavery. I don't own any men or any woman.
Right.
Nobody owns.
When you use phrases like property, that's what you imply.
I understand.
And so my point again is, you're a smart guy, right? There's no denying that. You're smart, you're a good talker. I've seen a lot of the stuff. But
I understand.
What I don't think you quite fully understand.
No, I understand very well.
When young, impressionable people who are not as smart see things like, I think my sister is her husband's property, yes, and you've just reaffirmed that belief, they think that they have the right to own women.
I understand that very well, Piers.
That's why people think you're a misogynist.
Completely.
Yeah, if he really did think that, then he has the right to say, yes, that's what I believe. I have a belief that you might not like, Pierce. I think women are property and they can be owned. But you're influencing all these people. Well, so are you, Pierce. You have an entire show. You're trying to influence people with your ideas and have these conversations with people. Everyone in the media is trying to influence. I'm doing this video right now on YouTube. I'm trying to influence you by thinking critically and give my reflections on these concepts from a biblical perspective. Everyone's trying to do it. Everyone's doing it to some degree or not. So it doesn't matter if you're trying to influence. The question is, does your influence, is it true or false? And of course, those of us who think that your influence is deleterious, like if you're a white supremacist, we want you to stop. But what we ought to do is, of course, train our children how to think. And we ought to advise them. We ought to be a good parent. We ought to watch and regulate to the degree to which they're on social media. It's just crazy that it's a free-for-all. So the fact is, Piers Morgan is appealing to a moral standard that Andrew Tate might not have, which is the idea that it's wrong for me to have an opinion that women are property. My own view is, I don't think they're property. I think biblically speaking, that's silly. Certainly from a Christian perspective, that's silly. But Andrew Tate can believe that if he wants to believe that. He can have 1 trillion followers on Twitter. He has, First Amendment right. He is. It's my responsibility as a parent to make sure my kids don't believe in stupid things like that. It's my responsibility, not Andrew Tate's responsibility for only saying things with which David agrees. That's silly. Or only saying things with which Piers Morgan agrees. That's silly too. The world is full of people who disagree with me and my views. And we're not going to protect them from everyone having a different, and oftentimes not just different, but false or even deleterious view, like racism and raping and murder and whatever it is. But nevertheless, I wouldn't tell Andrew Tate he has to keep his mouth shut. I would just say, as a parent, it's my job to be a good parent. Andrew Tate's not parent of my children. Piers.
I understand all of this very well, which is why when you're saying I was backtracking, I'm not.
Do you have any regret, though, over the way you phrased this stuff?
Well, this is the point I was trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is, when I was not nearly as famous and I was making long format content, I was not sitting there anticipating I'd become the most Googled man on the planet and that a few seconds could be taken out of context. That was not my anticipation.
No, but it's still what...
See, this is the silliness. I'm sorry. I have met people like this before. I understand. Of course I understand. But then the words you use, the sentences that come out of your mouth that you explicate, demonstrate you don't understand, or you're being disingenuous. Either you're being disingenuous when you say you understand, or you're being disingenuous in the sentences you're using. But they can't both be true. They can't. It's the law. It's the law of excluded middle and logic. You can't violate that, or it's illogical nonsense. So what usually is the case is the person who can't be wrong and doesn't want to be seen as wrong or inferior, and they'll say things like, "I understand, I get it." But then you hear the sentence, they don't get it. And that's Pierce's point, is that you don't get it. You keep saying they're property, but you're saying, but they're not slaves and they're not owned. But that's the definition of property. Well, it's just semantics. No, that is the definition. Definitions matter. And then he says, but are you sure this one? Oh, yeah, that's what I believe. Yeah, but the problem is ripped out of context. I just gave you 10 minutes to describe your view, and you just said the property all over again, over and over and over. Either Andrew's not very intelligent or he's being disingenuous.
You believe. It's what you believe now. So what's the difference?
Hopefully she's not
It's not. You're asking me. You're saying that young people who are impressionable.
If you said to me, look, Piers, honestly, I've had time to think about this, and I wish I hadn't said it. I don't believe that. That's one thing. Actually, you've said the opposite. You said, actually, that's what I think. Yeah.
I think that when
it doesn't really matter whether you recorded it when you're famous or not famous. It's what you actually believe, right?
I believe that a man has a duty to protect and provide for a woman. I believe that a woman's father gives her away to the man. That's what I believe, and that's in my marriage. That's the circumstance I'm going to live under. If people want to live in a different scenario, that's completely theirs. Their prerogative.
You went on to say about authority over women. If I have a responsibility over her, I must have a degree of authority.
Yeah.
For the same reason, if I have responsibility over and people are going to use their mind, it's an example, an analogy. Responsibility over a child, I have to have some authority.
Yeah.
So you believe as part of your ownership or your property of the woman, you have authority over her.
No, I believe if you have...
That's what you said.
I believe if you have responsibility over something, you have to have a degree of authority or you can't be responsible.
Yeah, but authority means, again, that you're the boss.
So he just said no, and then he said yes in his sentence.
The point I'm making, if you'll please let me finish at this point, the point I was trying to make was talking about the safety of a woman. She was walking alone at night, and I was saying, well, I wouldn't let my woman walk alone at night. And they said, well, you're not in charge of her. You don't get to decide what she does. I said, I understand, but if I'm responsible for her safety, and I'm the person who's burdened with making sure she is safe, I have to have the authority to say, don't put yourself in unsafe situations. The two things are linked.
Well, you don't have authority. You have you can absolutely have the right to say to the woman you're with, I don't think you should, but ultimately...
If she decides, then I can't force her.
Right, so authority implies that you have the ability to control someone.
No, authority implies that I have the moral right to sit and say that that's an irresponsible thing to do and I'm responsible for
That's not what authority means.
Well, I'm not going to... If you think I'm going to lock somebody up in their room, Is that what you're implying?
No, I don't think you know what authority means.
I know what it means. I'm saying that if
I just a different description of what authority means.
If I have responsibility for her safety, then I have to have the authority to tell her not to do unsafe.
Yeah, but authority means that you have some form of control over this woman.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I mean, just no, it doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Authority does not mean you control a person. Oh, it doesn't mean that at all. Oh, I'm all these political ads. Okay, well, it doesn't mean authority. Okay, well, that's enough of that for this. We're going back round. So the Bible doesn't say that women are the property or chattel or anything like that. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe, tell your friends. I'll see you next time.